Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. This episode is produced for Forbes, where I, Devin Thorpe, am a contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing. Today we have a wonderful guest, and I'm so grateful that he would join us today. From Aspen, Colorado, we have with us Amory Lovins, the Chief Scientist of Rocky Mountain Institute. Amory, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You've written a book, Reinventing Fire, and you've been talking about for really your whole career how we can shift our energy dependence from fossil fuels to renewables. And your message is remarkably hopeful. I wonder if you could summarize in a sentence or two why it is you're so hopeful about our shift away from fossil fuels.
The shift from fossil fuels to efficiency and renewables is happening very rapidly. In fact, the U.S. the last 3 years has been tracking nicely to target, only ahead on renewables, for a transition to get to 3/4 renewables and tripled efficiency by 2050.
That's really a remarkable idea that we could get so nearly completely off fossil fuels. I think you think we'll be off of oil, off of coal, and only using modest amounts of natural gas at that point. Is that a fair summary of your idea?
A third less natural gas and also no nuclear energy, and this would be $5 trillion cheaper than business as usual, accounting carbon release and all other external or hidden costs as worth nothing, which is a conservatively low estimate.
Right. It would be reasonable to think they might be worth something.
Yeah. We also found that this would need no new inventions and no act of Congress, but could be led by business for profit. Overall, there's a 14% IRR, and that includes, by the way, making the electricity system 80% renewable, half distributed, and highly resilient.
Yeah, great advantages. Let's talk for just a minute about some of the specifics. There are, I think, 4 main areas where we're using energy: transportation, buildings, factories, and the production of electricity, right? Aren't those the 4 areas you focus on? And perhaps
those are the 4 energy-using sectors. There aren't any other. Agriculture, for example, is considered part of industry.
Great. So in that context then, let's talk about transportation for a minute. How do you see the efficiency moving forward in transportation to help us reduce our reliance on fossil fuels?
Well, in cars, which use about half our oil, if we make them very light and more aerodynamic with better tires and integrative design, it turns out we can get electrification affordable much faster, and its cost is also dropping rapidly, and then you end up with cars equivalent to 125 to 240 miles a gallon with excellent economics and no compromise. In fact, really better driver attributes, safety, acceleration, and so on. You can also triple the efficiency of heavy trucks and at least triple that of airplanes very cost effectively. And these things are already underway. The trucking industry is halfway to the tripled efficiency goal in some recent test models, and both Volkswagen and BMW are in production on carbon fiber electric vehicles. The VW one, as our new RMI Solutions Journal yesterday pointed out, has specs eerily similar to those I published in the early 90s. So, yeah, if you want to read about all this, there is a book called Reinventing Fire that you can find out about at rmi.org/reinventingfire. Chapter 2 is on transport, 3 on buildings, 4 on industry, 5 on electricity, and they lay out all the details.
Let's talk a little bit more about the VW car, because it seems to me that in production that is perhaps the best example of what you're talking about. Is that fair to say?
Yes, with three exceptions. One is they could have made it even lighter. It weighs considerably more than it should because of a heavy powertrain. Second, it's only a two-seater, which is a very limited niche. And third, because they only made 250 of them to start with, it's very expensive. Although there was enough demand, they had to run a lottery, and there were a lot of disappointed bidders. That said, if you made a lot more of them, they'd be a lot cheaper. If you used the latest production process, it would be competitive with making steel cars at a similar volume. And the BMW i3 is a better example in the sense that it's already mid-volume, it's four-seat, regular car, and a very, very good one.
I've seen that one, and it is at once just like every other car you see on the road, and at the same time really quite different in its design and features. But it seems to include a lot of the kinds of things that you're talking about. The tires at least appear to me, not a physicist, as being different. The configuration of the vehicle is different. Tell us a little bit about some of the specific differences you see in that car vis-a-vis traditional steel cars.
Well, the passenger compartment is carbon fiber, although the whole thing will ultimately, I think, be carbon fiber. At the moment, it still has a metal frame underneath because they're conservatively taking it a step at a time. But if you make what's called a monocoque, kind of like a lobster shell, where the shell is the structure, then it's even lighter and stronger. It does have electric drive and a range extender option, which is a little cylinder that pops in next to the motor. There's no implications for packaging. And it's an excellent car. I drove one recently in Munich. They're selling like hotcakes. BMW has just raised 40-odd% its carbon fiber production because the sales are running something like twice forecast. And I think it's a forerunner of the combination of light materials, good aerodynamics, which VW went even further on, good tires, more efficient accessories. And when you put all that together, you get a factor 4 to 8 more efficient cars, not just a factor, say, 2 or 3 as current standards contemplate. And interestingly, this would be driven by competitive pressure and demand pull from customers rather than by regulatory mandate.
Yeah, well, it is remarkable. Remarkable. I'm like so many people, a little bit of a car buff, and so I could talk to you all day long about these cars, but we should probably move on. I think a lot of people, I know I, for instance, had a real hard time wrapping my head around some of the ideas that you talk about for air transportation. It just seemed so inherently required that you have massive jet engines that are powered by jet fuel, essentially oil. How does the world make a more efficient airplane? Where does the technology take us in that regard?
Well, the most important things are weight, engines, and aerodynamics. The Dreamliner and the Airbus equivalent generation are now half carbon fiber, up from 12% maximum before that. But back in the mid-90s, Lockheed Martin Skunk Works had a very nice Joint Strike Fighter design that was 95% composite, carbon fiber composite, 1/3 lighter, but 2/3 cheaper, because it was, I'm sorry, I said it wrong way around. 2/3 lighter, 1/3 cheaper. It was better but cheaper because it was designed from scratch to be made out of carbon, not metal, not mainly metal. Aerodynamics also continue to improve. Some designs now drop only 1 meter for every 50 meters of glide, just like great gliders did a few years ago. They're now even better. And the engines continue to improve. And then, of course, you can substitute fuel. United this year, U.S. Navy next year, are taking delivery of competitively priced biofuels that are just a drop-in replacement for jet fuel, and also the airframe makers and Air Force and others have shown that you can run next generation or next beyond that airplanes on liquid hydrogen. The reason we use it for rocket fuel is it's the lightest possible fuel, and it's a little bulkier, but that's less important than making it lighter.
What do you see going on, just moving on through your roster, what do you see going on in the buildings space that would allow buildings to become somewhat more efficient in order to reduce their energy drain?
Well, I'm talking to you, excuse me, from my own house, 7,100 feet up in the Rockies, where we've grown 55 banana crops so far with no furnace. That's what you can do with super insulation and passive design. There's 30,000 odd passive houses in Europe that this one helped to inspire. But for big buildings, you can use similar super windows that are about perfect in letting in light without heat. You can insulate the building properly. You can use very efficient lights, LEDs with very good design of how you distribute the light, efficient office equipment. You add it all up, you're saving a factor 3 or 4 over both new and retrofit buildings combined, mostly retrofit in this country. And they actually have a comparable or lower construction cost, and the retrofits are very cost effective. So those improvements have about a 33% IRR over the whole U.S. building stock, and that means by 2050 we could save $1.4 trillion net present value, and savings are worth 4 times their cost. So it's a gold mine, not even counting better human health performance and other outcomes of those efficient buildings.
So what you're seeing is quick payback.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
this is a big business now, fixing up buildings. You know, we saved only 2/5 of the Empire State Building's energy in a 2010 retrofit with a 3-year payback. But last year we did a retrofit of a, in a way, even more difficult federal office complex in Denver with a 70% saving. Right now we're finishing design on Rocky Mountain Institute's new little headquarters office building in Basalt, Colorado, to move in late next year. And that should be about twice as efficient as the most efficient office building was 4 years ago. So the state of the art continues to advance. You know, it's like the low-hanging fruit keeps growing back faster than you can pick it.
That's really remarkable. Give us a sense of where things have come in the last 10 years. Do you have some measure that would give us some way to benchmark the progress from the best today to the best, say, 10 years ago, or is that not a handy reference?
Well, I can say that when I heretically published in Foreign Affairs in '76 the notion that the U.S. could triple its energy efficiency practically cost-effectively with improved quality of life, that, as you can imagine, was very heavily criticized. We've already more than doubled energy efficiency since then, and now we can see how to triple it again. In other words, twice the saving I originally contemplated, except it's now 3 times cheaper than it used to be to generate those negawatts or saved watts. And we see no end in sight. In fact, one of the big stories in Reinventing Fire that's of particular interest as we apply it to China, they're very excited about this part, is that if you do integrative design, if you optimize a car or a building or a factory as a whole system, not as little isolated components, you can often get expanding, not diminishing returns to efficiency investments. That is, big savings can cost less than small savings. And we know from IT how powerful expanding returns are.
That really is remarkable and exciting. Let's move to factories. What are you seeing in the world of factories, production, manufacturing, that's bringing energy efficiency?
Well, a lot of industries are continuing to do very well, as they have for a long time, in wringing out energy waste, but not many of them have done that integrative design yet. And by applying it in the last $40 billion worth of factories that we've worked on in many, many different sectors of the economy, we found about 30 to 60% energy savings from our designs on retrofit with a few years payback, and in new construction even bigger savings, 40 to 90 odd percent, with almost always lower capital cost. One of the more interesting examples is in chip fabs, a high-tech modern industry, you would think. Well, working with Texas Instruments on their RFab, we were able to save quite a lot of energy and water, but more interestingly, also 30% of the capital cost, which is why it was built in Texas, not China. And then they bravely and wisely, I think, blessed Applied Materials, sending me to Shanghai to tell the Chinese Semicon conference how we did it, because competition is good. It's good for the whole industry. And TI felt that they could stay ahead, which they then did with further improvements in their next plant. The last chip fab, well, I think the next one to be built to our design would probably save 2/3 of the energy and perhaps half the capital cost, not counting the tools. And data centers are an even more remarkable example. We worked on one for EDS as it was becoming part of Hewlett-Packard. It's in the north of England, and we were able to only about triple the efficiency at the same capital cost because the client wouldn't let them adopt most of our recommendations, but EDS said had they been allowed to do so, they would have saved more like 95% of the energy and half the capex.
Wow. They're just huge opportunities. Of course,
it's not magic. It's just straightforwardly applying orthodox engineering principles, but asking different design questions in a different order. And I think readers of Reinventing Fire will find that vividly portrayed from real case studies they can understand in each of the sectors.
Now let's jump again to producing electricity. How are we seeing efficiency there? Some of that's a little more obvious to us, but tell us a little bit about what you're seeing.
Well, of course you can make power plants a bit more efficient, like getting better pumps and pipes and fans and ducts and so on. The thermal part has already been pretty well wrung out, but that's not the point. Those thermal power plants that raise steam to run turbines are already obsolete. They've done a magnificent job building and running our economy, but now we have better stuff that is often beating just their operating cost. You may have noticed in the headlines quite a few nuclear plants cannot compete with wholesale price just on operating cost. So, of course, the capital cost of building new ones is utterly prohibitive. No business case, but the same is true for building any kind of thermal power plant now. The cheapest generators are wind, latest contracts under 2 cents a kilowatt hour, which would be about 4 unsubsidized. The latest solar power contracts, photovoltaics at utility scale, under 5 cents a kilowatt hour, about 7 unsubsidized.
Is that
new thermal plant?
Does that include the capital cost, or is that just the operating cost?
Well, there isn't any operating cost except minor maintenance. There's no fuel, so it's almost all capital cost, which is also fun because once you build it, you know what your power is going to cost throughout the 25-year power purchase agreement contract life, and therefore you've just bought a free hedge against gas price volatility, and that's worth quite a lot of added value to the buyer. And by the way, cogeneration from industrial waste heat we now pay to throw away is another carbon-free source because we already released the carbon to make the process heat, and that is also a very cheap option and very big and growing fast. So actually, if you look at the whole world, here's the big picture. Since 2008, about half the new capacity added worldwide for generating electricity has been renewable. The fraction of that is modern renewables like wind and solar, not big hydro dams, has been growing very fast. And indeed, in each of the past 3 years, the world has added over 80 billion watts of those modern renewables and got $250 billion investment for them. They are taking over the market simply because they have lower cost and lower financial risk than the traditional power plants. And they scale in an utterly different way. You could take many years to build a cathedral-like classical power plant, or you could build, say, each year a chip fab-like factory, which each year thereafter will produce solar modules from each factory each year, producing the same amount of electricity that your cathedral was ultimately going to produce. So that's why solar is scaling faster in the world than cell phones.
I hadn't realized it was scaling that fast, because cell phones are scaling quickly.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk a little bit. I want to jump back to nuclear. Compare the economics of nuclear to solar and wind.
Well, the best market price benchmark we have for nuclear, although it is subsidized by big loan guarantees and otherwise, just came up in Britain with a deal to pay twice the wholesale price for 35 years to the largely state-owned Électricité de France for a couple of new units, the Hinkley Point C. And those come in at about, let's see, that would be 2.5 times the unsubsidized cost of U.S. solar power, or 3 or 4 times the unsubsidized price of U.S. wind power.
Wow.
Now, some people say they're not comparable because nuclear is so-called baseload. Well, baseload means 6 different things, but what they mean by that is they think it runs all the time. It doesn't. It runs equivalent about 90% of the time if you're lucky. But when it fails, you just lost 1,000 megawatts in milliseconds, often for weeks or months, often without warning. And quite a lot of reactors, I think over a third of those in the U.S. have been down at least once for over a year. So that's not exactly reliable. That's why you need at least 15% reserve margin on the grid if you have a bunch of big plants. You know, if you keep elephants in your living room, if an elephant dies, you need another standby elephant to haul the first one away, and standby elephants cost a lot and eat a lot. So it's better to have a very diversified portfolio of a lot of little units that can't all fail at once, and don't. So it turns out you do not actually need a breakthrough in cheap bulk storage of electricity, as many people suppose. If you go to rmi.org and search on storage myth, M-Y-T-H, you'll find out why that is so. But I'll just give you the factual demonstration of it. At least 4 European countries not noted for being rich in hydro, I'm not talking about Norway, got last year close to half their electricity consumption from renewables very reliably without adding bulk storage. Spain 45%, Scotland 46%, Denmark at least 47%, Portugal 58%, way out on the end of the European grid, because the operators have figured out how to juggle variable renewables with those that you can have whenever you want. And the result is, my colleague Clay Stranger says, like the way a good conductor leads a symphony orchestra through a score, no instrument plays all the time, but beautiful music is continually produced.
So the part of the magic that I've heard you allude to in the past for the modern grid is that cars may play a key role in that storage grid. How do you see that working out?
Well, the average car in the U.S. is parked 96% of the time. That's your second biggest household asset. 4% asset utilization. Well, this, of course, suggests many interesting business models now popping up all over the place for car sharing and ride sharing and smart apps that do that for you. But it's also interesting that as we go to electric cars, you'll have a whole bunch of batteries you paid for that 4% transportation use sitting there in your car, and they can indeed provide distributed storage when plugged in, like at your workplace, which is downtown on hot afternoons when the storage is most valuable. You may then say, well, then how do you drive home? But you can, of course, leave yourself enough range to drive home. That can be done automatically for you. And you may have a range extender, like if you had a BMW i3, not a problem. On the few days a year when it's worth dollars a kilowatt hour for the utility to buy power from your car instead of its plants, then your range extender goes on to get you home. Or, of course, you may have a fuel cell car, then it's not an issue either. Uh, but this suggests a really interesting business model that Dave Moskovitz came up with. Suppose that I'm an automaker making these electric cars, and I'll offer you your choice of two different ones. One of them $10,000 cheaper than the other, but they're physically identical. I don't know if 10,000 is quite the right number, but use it for illustration. It's probably not too far off. If you buy the cheaper one, you agree that when it's parked, you allow me, the automaker, to do electrical transactions between the car and the grid so long as I do not in any way compromise your driving capability or experience. In other words, you never know. Well, you'd probably buy the cheaper one. I'll probably make more than that discount through the electrical transactions, which I do behind the curtain and settle back a house. And by the way, I'm going to sell a lot more cars at that discount than without it.
Yeah, very interesting idea. Very interesting idea. And I think to your earlier point, we'll see all kinds of creative ways to get better utilization from our fleet and thereby also reduce demand on our roads. Amory, you've been extremely generous with your time. I wonder if you would, before we wrap up, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at the Rocky Mountain Institute and how people might engage with you there.
Oh, well, Rocky Mountain Institute is a 32-year-old independent, nonprofit, apolitical think and do tank that creates a clean, prosperous, and secure energy future. We do that mainly in the United States, but we work all over the place. I've worked in 60-odd countries. We are now very much applying our Reinventing Fire approach to China to help the central government inform their 13th five-year plan, working with their top energy policy and analytic shops. And that's looking very promising indeed, even bigger opportunities than in the U.S. Rocky Mountain Institute engages very deeply and practically, mainly with the private sector, because we want to get stuff done. We don't lobby or litigate, and we do a little in public policy, but that's not our main focus. We have about 100 people in 2 locations in Colorado and a few others popping up here and there. Our main efforts are in transforming the electricity sector, deep retrofit of commercial buildings. Look up retrofitdepot.org. Applying Reinventing Fire to China and perhaps after that to India. Speeding the automotive transformation to the ultralight electric vehicles I mentioned earlier. And also we have a number of community efforts working with cities, with states, with campuses, with military bases. We use a lot of military innovation to speed the transition through the co-evolution of private sector with civil society. So this harnesses the 3 most dynamic sectors we've got, and therefore does an end run around our least effective national institutions. Our work is very transideological. You can find out all about it at rmi.org, and a good place to start would be the Solutions Journal new issue that just went up at medium.com yesterday.
Fantastic. Well, Amory, again, I thank you very much for the time that you've spent with us today. It's exciting to learn about your work and the prospects for a much lower carbon emitting world. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All righty, let's do some good.
Thanks.